Know where you're from. My name is Dr. Gabby Cudjoe Wilkes. I have the joy and honor of leading our TIDEL Fellowship and an all director of programs here at Union. And we welcome you to the space. Would love to leave some space for David to say hellos. So, David, please welcome folks in.
Sure. Hi, everyone, and welcome to what I think is our eighth, maybe ninth TIDEL Speaker Series. This is our second year of these events, and TIDEL is an union-based initiative that is funded by the Lilly Endowment, and the big idea is that progressive faith-based organizations, congregations, nonprofits, all are deeply engaged in the work of innovation, often with technology as a big piece of that. But there are many challenges, ethical questions, financial constraints that these organizations face. And TIDEL is all about building a community, a space, a community of practice to bring folks together to engage with those working within the faith-based world, as well as bringing in experts and practitioners from communities that might be adjacent to that. And so we offer the fellowship program, which is a year-long intensive program for teams from faith-based organizations, as well as other opportunities to engage, including our speaker series, of which we are here today, and a virtual community platform, which I will paste in the chat, and you all are welcome and encouraged to join. Dr. Gabby Cudjoe Wilkes leads our fellowship as well as our programming. And I'm very excited to have Dr. Gabby here, as well as Bethany. So I will hand it over to Dr. Gabby now.
Right. So, friends, we are excited to jump into this. I want to shout out a brand new team member of ours at Union. She is less than 2 weeks on the job. But Kimber, just give a wave to folks. Kimber Jennings is newly at Union with us. This is her first speaker series with us, and we're just delighted to have her on the team. All right, everyone. Well, as we begin to move into our conversation for today, I have just been so thrilled with the way in which we've been able to cover so many areas of focus in this semester's speaker series. I'm seeing some familiar faces who have been to at least one other talk this semester. And so whether you're with us with Michael Hannigan, whether you're with us with Dr. Philip Butler, with us with Liz Harris, and now with us with Bethany Stolle, we have had an absolutely phenomenal semester of engagement, talking about everything from artificial intelligence and sustainability to the ethics of technology to higher education and tech, to faith-based communities and communities that feel more surveilled, how they might engage technologies. And now today, we're going to have a great conversation around user experience and interactive design and engagement. So you are in the right place if you are someone who is looking to really be intentional about how you hold digital space with folks in your community and ways in which you would like to get them a platform or a space where they feel like they're getting what they're looking for, what they signed up for, what they were hopeful for. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about many of those particularities. So it gives me great joy to introduce our guest today, Bethany Stolle. Bethany was with us for our first cohort. We brought her on to lead the design thinking process as one of our co-leads who did translation work between the business world's approach to design thinking and how faith-based communities could adjust that language and make it really land well for our work. And so Bethany was with us for about 4 months doing that work last cycle. She was also a member of our esteemed application readers cohort for this year. So for our current fellows, Bethany has read your applications, and she was one of the wisdom partners that we went to as we tried to make sure that we had the right blend of folks in our fellowship. And so I consider her a close colleague and one for whom I'm really grateful we have are in the space today. So to more formally introduce her, Bethany Stolle is a user experience professional with a background in design research, interaction design, curriculum development, education, nonprofit work, and entrepreneurship. She loves design, theory, collaboration, and making ideas happen. She's also the founder of Stolle Creative. And so if you want to learn even more about her background, you can visit her website at stollecreative.com. But you all know how we do at the speaker series. Can you give some emoticons and some welcomes and some hellos so that we can welcome Bethany into the space? And we will pivot into our conversation. Hello, Bethany.
Hello, it's great to be here today.
Great to have you. Great to have you. And I have been looking forward to this conversation for several months. So let's jump in. Let's dive in. By way of housekeeping, friends, Bethany and I will have a conversation first. But if you've got questions you can't hold, drop them in the chat, and then we will also pivot at about the 30-minute mark to invite more Q&A across all guests who have gathered. So, Bethany, I want to dive in first with a real brass tacks question. This might be a boring question, might be one that you always have to answer, but just to make sure we're operating with similar language and folks are on the same page, how would you define interactive design and your work as an interactive design professional?
Yeah, so different people will probably define it a little bit differently based on the kind of work they're doing. I consider myself an interaction designer because I care a lot about how do we interact with one another, how do we interact with our technology, and how do we interact with one another through our technology. So really for me, the core of it is who are people, what are our motivations, what are our mindsets, what are our goals, and then how is technology part of that and kind of serving person to person interactions. I think other designers, I mean, I've worked with folks who are fantastic visual designers and they get really interested in kind of design systems and how do we visually create these interfaces. I personally care most about the people and really want to start with the people, understanding who users are, understanding what our context is, and then how do we map the technology to serve that. Um, Other people who, maybe come from more of a technology background
Yeah.
sometimes get fixated on the technology or here's a solution and how do we find a place to apply it. Um, I like to step back and really start with people.
Yeah. And I love that because even at TIDEL, that's the way that we engage tech as well. So we're really more interested in innovation and interested in how people, communities, and organizations can access innovation. And we see technology as a way to help support innovative ideas versus being a place and space where we're just tinkering with tech all day, just for the purposes of learning new technologies. So,
Which, like, it can be fun at times. I
yeah,
mean, it's fun to like experiment with new technology and see what it can do because that can also populate our imaginations for what's possible. They can spur one another on. But I think when we lose the humans in there, we're really missing out on an opportunity, especially for people who are in ministry and care a lot about our communities.
yeah, for sure. So let's do a pulse check just in the room. If you work in design at all, would you please raise your hand, whether it's graphic design, whether it's Canva, you just kind of are the one who puts flyers and things together for your organization, or whether you are even in the work of interactive design. If you are in design at all, can you raise your hand? I see you, April, Alicia, Terry, and those who are off camera, you can even use the emoticon. Okay. Adinaran, I might be saying your name incorrectly. If I am, apologies. Okay. So we've got at least 4 or 5 folks who that's their lane and that's their work. That's really helpful. And for those of you, no, it's not your work. Alicia, you shake your head no. Okay. So, um, can you share with us by chat or unmute what's the distinction for us?
I have to do it because
Okay.
I'm the only person that is doing it, but it's definitely not my lane or my work.
That, that's fair. Okay. So folks, thank you. So folks who raise their hand, they are doing it in some way. Whether they want to be, whether they picked it up and everything in between. Okay, that's helpful. So about a third of the room. is showing up in that way. So good. So in this conversation, for those of you who are in that lane, you're going to pick up, I think, some tools that'll be helpful. And for those of you who are not, I think it will still help you to get a bird's eye view of what we're doing. And Adeniran, if your hand was up for that poll, feel free to lower it. If you have a question, we'll come to that soon. Okay, great. All right. So Bethany, we've got a sense of who's in the room. Also would love for you all to just put in the chat if you're representing a nonprofit, if you're representing a congregation, if you're in here just as yourself, if you just came because you heard the event was happening, you were curious, just let us know what type of community you engage with most regularly, and that'll help to kind of guide a bit of how Bethany and I continue our conversation. Okay. All right, Bethany. So we've got a sense of who's in the room a bit. We'll learn more as the time goes on. But let me ask you this next question. What does it mean to design digital experiences with users and communities in mind? Another way of saying that question is, how can we assess applications and digital tools in a way that keeps at the forefront the main user experience of our communities, keeping the main thing, even as we try to expand the design experience that people might be accustomed to. What does that mean, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so for the last like 10, 15 years, I've worked with a lot of I've worked on a lot of software as a service, like software design teams. And when I'm working on a new project, I like to then go back to basics. Like I love interviewing people. Um, in March 2020, which you may remember when the world shut down, I actually started a new job at the end of March 2020 that was for in the space of online payments and donations for faith-based and nonprofit groups and also in schools. Very interesting time to be starting a new job when all of a sudden churches were saying, we can't meet in person, we can't pass a plate. How do we do this like digital hybrid? Like, where do we even start? Um, the amazing opportunity in that is because everyone was forced into this space of kind of rapid exploration and innovation. There was a lot more openness and forgiveness for trying something out if it didn't work. Um, but the team that I joined in March 2020, we also had, I think, two new other people who joined right around the same time who did not come from a background in working with faith-based communities. And so I said, we're going to understand what's happening. So we did remote interviews with probably 15, 20 different people in various relationships to church and stewardship and donations. Um, and they were, in-depth interviews to try to understand like why do they care about this faith community? Why are they involved? How are they being involved? For people who are in leadership roles in churches, how are they adapting? What is the pain? What is the loss? For a lot of them, the biggest loss was actually um, I can't be at the side of one of my parishioners who is in the hospital. We can't wrap blankets around the shoulders of our seniors who are graduating and have had this completely disrupted experience. Um, their pains were about technology, but they were really about people.
Right.
And so we wanted to understand what are the goals, what are the meaningful experiences of people in these communities, from pastors and church staff to lay leaders, very active volunteers, to people who were like casually involved in church, but maybe not super invested in the day to day, and understanding all of their different experiences and how then do we, as a company that was building technology, support these different people coming from very different experiences and very different perspectives in a way that could help foster a sense of community and stewardship? Like, yeah, we do payments and digital transactions, but one of our takeaways is that church people are story people. How do we help churches tell the story of who they are, who God is, and in a way that sure helps support stewardship, but more importantly, helps people feel connected when they are digitally distributed.
I love
So really what we did is went back to understand who people are, what are they losing? What are they hoping for? Um, how is the church supporting them or not? How do they want to get involved?
What are they losing? What are they hoping for? How was the congregation supporting them? I hope y'all taking notes. Okay, keep going.
Hopefully, I'm just I talk and then I remember what I said. Hopefully,
Yeah,
um,
that's good.
but really, and then also, what is their context? I mean, we found people who were, attending churches across the country because they could. People who were like wintering, who could now in new ways stay connected to their home congregation in ways that weren't possible before COVID forced a lot of churches into new ways of thinking about digital engagement. Um, but it isn't just about the technology, it's about the humans and the connections. And I think 5 years later, we probably need to do a reassessment of all of this because we've spent the last 5 years, well, probably the first 2 to 3 years of what are we even doing? How do we build systems? How do we bootstrap together all of these technologies so we can just keep things going and not feel like we're abandoning our parishioners, our communities. Um, and then probably spent a year or two trying to optimize those systems. But now we're in a different environment. We're also in a different social context. We're in the culture has shifted and evolved. And I think people are longing for in-person, hyper-local connection again. So what does that mean when churches for the last 5 years have been really um, focused on, and other nonprofits have been really focused on digital communities when like our social media platforms have kind of imploded.
Yeah.
Um, so the technology has continued to evolve, maybe not in the direction that we would hope for as people who, as leaders who care desperately about a community and not about like advertising revenue. Um, so what does it mean now? I would probably, if I were still at that organization, I would probably then go back to basics and say, okay, let's do another research project to understand users and what has shifted. What about the context is different? Um, where are people feeling fatigued? Where do they want connection? And what does that mean then when we think about how we're utilizing digital technology to support and sustain communities? And where do we maybe need to like set it aside or come up with something else because what we've been using isn't serving us in the same way that it used to be.
Yeah, I'm actually just jotting this down for our guests to be able to retain this. This is really good. It has me think about there was someone in the room just now who said, I'm the one who has to make the flyers. It's not my work. It's not what I intended to do, but it's me. But I even think about the ways in which flyers don't do what they did 5 years ago, right? There was a time where like all you needed was a flyer and the people that folks want to hear from, and they're in the room, whether it's physical or digital, they're there, right? And when you talk about that fatigue, I think the fatigue of promotion, right? Now it's like people need a video clip of hearing that person speaking about the thing they do in the world, or people need a story segment, right, which is like has nothing to do with the actual event, and then at the end it's like, and also come meet us on Thursday at 12. Like people think they need different ways to be engaged because they'll gloss over a flyer and it might somewhere in their head retain some degree of awareness, but for the most part that flyer is, it's information, but it's not generating the same user experience that it may have a while back. And so even at that level of like user experience, right? That person who asking those questions of where are folks fatigued, what has shifted, what do they need? Well, if what you need is to get the people to the space, whether it's digital or physical, I would imagine an interactive like user designer is thinking, well, the end goal is still the same, but this methodology has got to be tweaked in a way. Like there's something
And
about this that's got to shift.
their context is broader than probably your usual view.
Yep.
So, one of my favorite things back when I worked in publishing, we were trying to understand, like, identify ways to support in home faith practices and rituals. And I went to like 3 different cities across the country and went to interview parents in their homes. They didn't know I was going to ask for a tour. So you get like real life. Like we inevitably ended up in people's bathrooms
Wow.
because they were parents of young children. And that is where a lot of ritual activity happens. bath time, the kid is happy and contained usually. Sometimes parents would sit down on the floor and it was the first time they could have a legitimate conversation with one another all day because their child was like happily playing and they could both feel like they were interacting with their child, but also have a little space for their own conversation. We would like visit the children's bedrooms and there would be a toy explosion all over the place. And there was even one mom I was interviewing and we're talking sitting on her couch and she's like seamlessly bouncing back and forth between like feeding her child and then going and getting a snack and then the kid is like bouncing on her leg and then goes over and plays and she sets up the blocks again and you see it's not just about like well what is the children's book that we could create or like window clings that help tell a Bible story or something like that. You see the way that the way that families and are interacting with one another and the bigger picture of their lives. Because, if you're working for a nonprofit or a church, you are focused in that world a lot of your day. That's, where your paycheck is coming from. You're spending your time in a building, or even if you're remote, most of your day is focused on that. um, if you step back from like the promotion thing, and if you looked at someone's inbox, or saw the notifications that they're getting from work, from school, from, you know, Amazon, from like all of these different third parties, you get a sense of the complete overwhelm that they might be feeling. So then how do you think about the way that you connect with people? I mean, I'm even experiencing a little bit of that. I've gotten really involved I got two elementary age kids and I'm really more involved in the PTA. And we're doing a free teacher shop to help support our teachers because they have to spend a lot of money out of pocket for supplies in their classroom. Um, yeah, we've sent out like, here's an update in the PTA newsletter. If you want to donate, great. There's also like four other donation drives happening concurrently. So what I'm doing is I'm talking to other parents who might be interested in supporting teachers in this way. I'm getting their phone numbers and I'm texting them. I'm chatting with them while we're at pickup because I think it doesn't scale in the same kind of way, but I think there's like this balance of yes, you can send stuff out, um, but it's not always getting through. And even like the best Canva design ever may not actually cut through. So, where are your people at? Where are they feeling overwhelmed? And what are other ways that you can think about interactions, whether it's digital or otherwise mediated, to be able to connect, support, and like build more community and investment?
So when you think interaction, it's so funny. Interaction is a very different word from interactive, though they are very similar. So designing interaction is broad enough to be digital or in person, whereas designing an interactive experience, I hear that as creating an experience that is interactive through some tactile product or tech. So that's also really helpful. Just for those that are in the room, as we did the poll of who's here, a lot of congregational leaders are here, and some nonprofit leaders are here. And I think you mentioned you had the skill more so of an in-person model of kind of we put something in a newsletter. It didn't cut through the noise because four of the things are there. So we got phone numbers and texted and reached out, right? Which, texting platforms have existed for a very long time where you could plug that into a tech, resource because you talked about scaling, but you can scale texting. I mean, I've done, texting for campaigns where I've reached out to 500 folks in 3 minutes, so there are ways to scale, even though folks can kind of tell when it's robotic or not. But I think what I'm hearing overall, and what I hope that the audience is hearing, is that whatever medium you decide to use, one should still take the time to design the interaction that we're hopeful that people will access. And we build that design based on these questions of where are they fatigued, what do they need, what connection are we trying to create, what might have shifted for them, so forth and so on, right? Okay.
Yeah. And I think thinking about people as whole people beyond their experience interacting with you and your organization or your community, that there's a lot of other things going on in their lives. I mean, I remember in the church world, people were really upset because sports are interfering with Sunday mornings and with Wednesday nights. And it's like, well, yeah, so how can we get church out of the church building where they're having to come to us? Is that a possibility? How do we think about that reframe? Um, instead of just being mad and ranting about the reality of people's lives.
Yeah.
Um, it's hard to do, though. It's really hard to do.
Yeah.
Um, but I think how can I continually come back to like how can we better understand who the people are in our communities and what their needs are and what is their context at this place and time. And
Yeah.
then how do we build, experiences that can support that and help them connect and engage in ways that they probably want to with our community. It's just that we're one of multiple things going on in their lives.
Yeah. So let me pivot to one more question, and then I'm going to open it up for the room. But one question that I have for you, and so I support that for some of this, it's going to take returning to old school methodologies of just getting to people. But I would gather, I would wager that many folks in this room are probably still at the phase of looking to enhance digital experiences they began several years ago, and perhaps are at that point of fatigue where folks are not engaging in the way they used to, but people are still saying, I still prefer digital options to be available to me. I don't want to be restricted to only in person. Like, I don't want to go back to that world, but also I may or may not engage your digital space if it doesn't meet the experience I'm looking for. So for those folks or people who are kind of in that world, what is some advice that you would offer to these business owners or small group leaders, nonprofit leaders, congregational leaders, these folks who are feeling a little bit overwhelmed with like, how do I create a digital experience that doesn't feel like plug and play, that feels more personalized, even in a world of digital fatigue and folks saying they want in-person interaction, but folks always asking for the digital option. Like we've all been,
Right.
right? We're like, everybody's like, please do it in person. And then you do it in person and they're like, okay, great. But can I get it online? Is there going to be a playback? Is there another way to get it? So people are in this duality of like what they want and also how they've structured their lives and what they can access. And so as a user design interaction like professional, like what are some best practices of how to make these platforms do more than just the functionality of connection?
Yeah, I mean, there's the chasm between our aspirational selves and reality. Yeah, I would love to go to this thing, but I'll either default to the online version, or like I say, I'll watch the recording and that may or may not happen. Um, I mean, I think if there's a way that you can like identify some people that you would want to talk to and craft some really great open-ended questions to ask about like not just your experience that you've offered, but where have they found other really meaningful online digital communities? Um, and what are if you talk to 5, 6, 8, 10 people to understand, like, what are the barriers to them doing an in-person thing? What are the digital experiences that they found really, um, I don't know if life-giving is, a little bit too far, but that they've really enjoyed and appreciated. What is it about those that was really meaningful for them? And then if you start to overlay those, you might start to see some patterns, and you can kind of map that out of, for, maybe it's like the timing is wrong. They would love to do something in person, but 7:30 conflicts with like family time or something like that. Um, Start to overlay and understand for these folks that you've talked to, what about the digital thing do they like? Or beyond what you've offered, just what have they done in general? What are analogous experiences that have been really impactful? And what are the lessons that you can learn from those? And then start to apply and kind of experiment with in your own offerings.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but
And
again, I'm like, I love to talk about analogous experiences because I assume that I'm probably not doing it the best or right. And I can probably learn from other people who are exploring you know, ways of being in community.
mm-hmm. And are there certain modalities that you found, but just even in your research or your experience, where if folks are on a digital platform, these modalities help them to feel more connected? Whether it's like push notifications or audio options or videos, or like as you're like in your design element, are there certain things that you've seen that when these things are used with more frequency, they tend to create a space where folks feel like I'm not on this platform by myself? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think like anything to improve accessibility, so closed captioning, different ways that people can engage. So like having the option for cameras on, cameras off, having the ability for people to chat, or setting up also like the kind of like here, the terms of here's how we're going to engage. This is initially an interview. Put your questions in the chat. We'll be able to open up discussion more broadly. Um, uh, I really appreciate the community that Sharon McMahon has been building. She's America's government educator, and she has a book club that she facilitates through a combination of Instagram posts, Zoom hangouts and workshops, and then like her own website. But she's always continually asking people like, "What do you want? What's going to be helpful for you today?" And through, like Instagram polls, but she's constantly soliciting feedback so that even if you only attend like a couple of book club meetings and follow her Instagram stories, you still feel like you're a meaningful part of this community and that she's listening to you. So having kind of even in an environment that might be a little bit more broadcast oriented, having spaces for people to be able to engage and get involved. I also think it's really important to develop kind of moderation skills. So if you are, streaming worship and you want people to be able to chat, make sure that you have someone who's trained and equipped to facilitate and monitor chat and find feedback loops back into leadership so that you close those loops. Something that I really love from kind of not like digital product design, but the world of service design is you can do some journey mapping and service blueprinting. I actually pulled out, there's a book from Rosenfeld Media called Orchestrating Experiences. Um, but they talk about like how can you map out someone's experience? You identify the touch points that are key moments across an experience that you can give kind of like a signature moment. Um, and how do you think about the experience principles that you want to support? So, you know, I actually had done this with one company that I worked with where they did a lot of service work, but the handoff from closing a sale to like onboarding and then the regular service that they provided was really broken because your experience reflects the divisions and the like org chart of your company. And so what we did is we mapped out this is the current experience. Here are where kind of the breakdowns are happening. And then we ran some small experiments of like, how do we improve this piece? Because there were a lot of escalations because certain people were doing certain part of the process, but then they would have a handoff, and then there was another handoff and another handoff. And so instead, we did an experiment where one role was kind of working across handoffs. Um, and with fewer clients working kind of end to end for the process. And it really improved the experience. And it actually improved. We even like had the person who was doing the experiment fill out a little survey at the end of each day to kind of recap what she had done, what worked well, what was frustrating, does she feel caught up, all of that. And she was much more satisfied because she wasn't just hammering the same problem over and over again. She got to see more of the experience and or like follow with clients through a longer part of the journey and anticipate problems that she could see coming down the line. She could address them up front. And so we did that by like mapping out the experience across different parts of the organization, identifying where the breakdowns happen, figuring out small scale experiments to improve certain parts of this journey. And then like we ended up kind of fundamentally reorganizing the way that some of the teams worked and some of their roles because we thought holistically from the perspective of the external end user, not these are our job descriptions and these are our kind of silos in the company.
Yes, I love that too because we all have those like people who are like, I want to help. How can I help? And so this is a great model for people who want to help, where it's like you don't have to be incredibly tech savvy to like go through the experience as it stands now, but with this eye towards what's working and what's not, and then making certain suggestions. I love it.
And frankly, where a lot of people get lost in like in a community, or, I did this in higher ed as well, people get lost in these handoff moments. And so if someone is interested in getting involved in your nonprofit or your church, how do you make sure that they don't just like fill out the contact card, but that you actually, in a timely way, follow up with them, get them connected, get the handoff happening, kind of some sort of like onboarding or welcome experience, and really smooth that out so that you aren't actually losing these folks at different handoff points because you're thinking about it from your organization's perspective, not from the end users.
So good. Designing interaction. I love it. All right, friends, we are at the Q&A portion of our time together. If you have a question that you would like to raise, please feel free to raise your hand, and we will acknowledge you to put your question forward. Or if you're unable to speak audibly today, please feel free to put your question in the chat. Any questions for Bethany? Rosemary, do you have a question? Saw that you unmuted. Might have been in error. Okay, while folks are sitting with the information you've shared, I'll advance another question. And folks, as questions come up for you, just flag us, raise your hand and or put it in the chat and we'll acknowledge you. So Bethany, another piece of conversation that I'm interested in, you and I, and just some of our discussion in preparation for today, talked a bit about how this world from a professional standpoint has shifted, and there's been a lot of conversation where instead of having the end user in mind, products and brands have been kind of co-opting interaction design, where they're more so wanting you to interact in a way that it leads consumers towards sign up for this thing, try out this new project, almost towards an ad perspective, instead of just the end user receiving the experience they wanted. And so, what would you say? What are some things we should look out for or guard against, especially if we're trying out new applications or new platforms? In a sense, how do we keep the experience for the purpose that it's for, and not having it feel like it's just a big old promotional ad to get people to opt into some other tool?
Yeah, I mean, in the world of user experience design, product design, there's been a professionalization in the last 10 years or so, 10, 15 years, um, which, there's now a lot of, when I was working for technology teams, we'd have our developers, our product managers, and our designers. And historically, the designers were really user experience designers. How do we represent and advocate for users? Now there's been a bit of a shift to product designers, which is like, how do you balance user needs? But really, we need to like hit these key performance indicators, these KPIs, and these business targets. So I think really being cognizant of what is the motivation for the technology company when you are evaluating a new technology, getting as much as you can, getting beyond their kind of like marketing materials and trying to understand what is their business model. Because we've seen kind of the fallout of Facebook and Instagram and a lot of these social media platforms. Like, while they maybe started with like, we're going to connect and we can, know who else is on our campus or stay connected with people that we grew up with. Um, it's advertising. Like, that is their main driver now, and it has fundamentally compromised the experience of the platform, and people have left that in droves. So thinking about when you're evaluating a new technology, um, what are the goals of the company? And you can't necessarily influence those, and you have to use kind of what's available. But what are the opportunities of this? And then what are the risks? And just being really aware that like you are not in control of this company's roadmap for their technology. So
Right?
oh,
The roadmap can also shift. Like we've seen the need to continually revisit what these tech companies are committed to as they receive pressure from other places to shift the original reason why they open, because they're getting funding from somewhere else, or you know any other reason.
right. And it's not realistic to say, well, we're just going to build all our technology ourselves because that's why these companies exist. But just being really aware that when you are using software as a service, like there are going to be limitations to, or you are kind of beholden to their roadmap. And so figuring out what are the things that you're kind of willing to um, risk for that. And then, what are the things that you actually maybe want to still keep or maintain so that it can't be kind of like exploited by a third party company. I don't know if that answered the question or if that was helpful.
Yeah, no, no, that's great. And it also gave space for more questions to pop up. So I see the queue. We'll go with Rebecca's question first, then Rosemary, then Mandy. That's just the order that they came in. So Rebecca's question is, what are some good resources to learn more about interaction design for everyday non-experts?
Um, I need to like go back to my list and see what's still in in
Okay.
print. Um, so I studied design at the Austin Center for Design. And around the time I was there, they actually came out with a book called Wicked Problems. That's both kind of high level. It's actually, I think you can read it for free online if it's still available. And I think they did some print versions. But they get into the concept of design to address wicked problems like Horst and Riddle's wicked problems concept that are like large, complex social problems. Um, and it also, the back half of the book has like some pretty practical tools that you can use for understanding who people are and what they need, and how can you develop insights that are grounded in user understanding. How do you start to prototype and rapidly iterate? How do you test, and kind of how do you launch things in the world? So I think that one can be
Do
helpful.
you remember the author for that? There's just a
Uh,
few that are, I'm doing a quick search and a few authors.
yeah, it would have been John Kolko and AC4D.
Okay.
Um,
Did it put in
I
the
also think there's some different user experience oriented books that I've read that are on research, interviewing users. Um, Indy Young, INDI. Young has some really interesting stuff about understanding mental models for people. Um, and then there's probably less so on the like prototyping and design itself. I think more understanding ways to interview users and synthesize research. Um, I really like the books that Rosenfeld Media has put out. I'm trying to think of what is the other, a book apart, but I don't know if that publishing house is folded. Um, and then there's some other stuff on service design that can help you think about journey mapping, orchestrating experiences, building service blueprints. So you're thinking more than just the like, here's the technology that we're using or adapting, and understanding what is this experience over time for people who are um, part of your community, and how can you best serve them and orient your work around their needs.
Great. Thank you so much. We have a question from Rosemary, and then we'll be going to Mandy. So Rosemary's question, hailing from Brooklyn, New York, which is where I am currently based. I am in Bed-Stuy at the moment, so shout out to Brooklyn. But Rosemary asks, have you worked with older persons who share technology? How can they be led to be more comfortable with tech?
So one of the churches that I worked with when I was doing this interview project in early COVID, they had a big technology barrier that left a lot of their older members feeling isolated. And what worked best for them, they had gotten like a donation of some older tablets and older tablets, older phones, that kind of thing, older computers, and they like sent teams out to do some training on how to use the technology. Um, I also think moving beyond, so there may be some tangible things like making sure that things are accessible, that you've got good audio that's really clear, you have clear video, that they fundamentally have access to, Wi-Fi or 5G or whatever they need to access, and they've got appropriate devices. Um, that you use captions where possible if that's going to be helpful for them. Um, where you can, if you can do training, I think that's really useful. But I also think moving beyond this, like, this stereotype that like older folks may not be able to use technology. Um, some of the folks that I've talked to, it's like the 25-year-old is the one who's moved to a dumb phone and now can't be part of the community because they're making intentional decisions to move away from technology that's built on addiction loops, or they don't have the finances to be able to pay for, to pay for Wi-Fi or to have a smartphone. And in contrast, it's
Off
like,
the grid. There's so many folks right now who just want to be like, they don't want to be found. They want to be off the grid.
right, exactly. And then you've got the like 85-year-old who's FaceTiming grandchildren, great
Right.
grandchildren all the time. So I think, well, some of those, like we talk in the world of design, we'll have different personas. And I could get on my soapbox about personas because I've seen like Sally Secretary and Pastor Paul, and they're just like made up stories about people that we aspirationally, or maybe not even aspirational, that we stereotype so that it's easier for us to justify decisions that we want to make, as opposed to being grounded in research and understanding. What I really like about Indy Young is she has this whole world of thinking styles. So, because people may change thinking styles depending on their context. So, one example that she uses is like checking bags at the airport. Um, there's the one thinking style might be never again. I checked my baggage, it got lost, I didn't have what I needed. I will never again check my bag. The other one, another thinking style might be like, I am a pro traveler. I've got my system. I carry on with me because it's expressed through the airport and get to my gate and get to my destination. And like express is kind of their mindset. Um, Another mindset be like, it's not that inconvenient. These aren't she has actual like names for these thinking styles, but like it only takes me an extra 5-10 minutes. I check my bags. I have ease through the terminal. Um, Someone who is traveling with a family maybe ease through the terminal thinking style. And then on another day, if they're traveling for work and they travel frequently, they might be the like, I've got my express, like I've got my system locked down.
Yeah.
And so I like the flexibility of that because it's getting into kind of their mindset and thinking style rather than demographic data to drive a stereotype about a certain persona. In general, like, unless there's a really good reason, I do not like demographic based personas. I saw them in ed tech a lot where it's like, oh, this is like so and so who's a first gen college student who, and it's like, it's just a projection of stereotypes that is
Yeah.
not ultimately helpful because what I care more about is like a student's resilience. Um, Microsoft also has these personas that are like a spectrum. So when they're thinking about accessibility and inclusive technology, you might have someone who, how do you use a mobile phone if you have a broken arm? That's like a temporary disability.
Mhm.
Or if your arm has been amputated, that's a different use and adaptation. But for a period of time, it's just like the person who has a broken arm or the person who's holding a baby or a pet and can't use that arm at the moment.
Yeah.
Um, so thinking more about how is someone using it, not who are they as a person. Like what are someone's needs in that moment, not like demographic data. So all
Yeah.
of that to say, like when we're thinking about like older folks and access to technology, I would challenge us to pivot and reframe that as people who struggle with technology. What are the reasons they're struggling? How can we address those particular reasons and help them overcome the barriers to being able to successfully use the technology? Or maybe we need to work around it and not try to get them to conform to technology. How can we reach them in and connect with them in other ways that are going to be meaningful for them?
Great. Thank
Great.
you.
That's great. That's great. All right, we are at the point of our last two questions. They are already pre-queued. So Mandy Mack will go first, and then Adeniran will go after Mandy. So Mandy, feel free to unmute and share with us your question.
Uh, it's been a good class. My first question was kind of already answered by some of the other questions that came before me. The next one comes. Um, I think Dr. Wilkes mentioned earlier about surveillance. One of the key things that has come out of the latest government immigration projects, to put it nicely, in New Orleans was online tracking and documentation of activists trying to protect the immigrant community. My community in the transgender community, that's where I'm focused. What can we do? And I have a real problem with even going here. But how can we protect ourselves from unwanted surveillance, from attacks, and because we're certainly not trying to hide anything, illegal, because we know there's so much of that on the web, and our government has access to so many more tools than we will ever dream of. How do we protect ourselves from the surveillance that we don't want?
Um, that's really timely and really hard. I don't know if I have a solution. I do think the challenge of software as a service and using third-party platforms like, Facebook or anything that requires registration means that someone somewhere has data on us and where we are. Um, I my husband is a software manager and really interested in security, and it's like using Signal for, maybe not, you may not be able to use it for like mass messaging, but if you are building kind of ways to connect and communicate, Signal is probably your best option as an app because it is fully encrypted. Every single message is encrypted. Just don't add a journalist to your chat. um,
It all happened with the federal government, but yes.
right. Um, I mean, I think there are probably other areas that I don't know about, but thinking about like how can you also kind of maintain your own lists instead of using like a third party database? How can you kind of maintain your own list to keep track of your community to keep them safe? Um, I do love when surveillance is flipped. And so, we've seen ways that people actually were using the Waze app to report icy conditions so that people knew where to go. And so I think there are ways that we can also think about potentially subverting the surveillance. But I don't know that I've got a good answer, but thinking about what is the risk of this technology and like a data leak or a data exposure. My husband listens to the Security Now podcast, which is a really phenomenal podcast on security issues in technology. It's probably more technical than what I would typically listen to. Um, but I do think like Signal or figuring out how can you kind of keep track of your people in those ways and might be useful. But thinking really carefully too, like how can you also include people in your community if they are not safe or willing to use a certain technology that is going to potentially surveil them or put them at risk for data leaks.
And I would just add, Mandy, I tend to find more comfort in some of these digital communities that are invitation based. So the community that we just launched for TIDEL in October is housed on Mighty Networks, where the way that you join that community is by accessing our invitation link. And then we have 2 or 3 screener questions that we were able to decide upon that everyone must answer before we admit them into the community. And so for us, those questions are not high. There's not a high barrier to entry with those questions because we have a desire to create a broad community. But for communities who are concerned about being surveilled, you can make those questions kind of assessed. It can be, questions that help you to really know who's in the room with you, which also gives you grounds for dismissal if someone breaches community agreements. And Mighty Networks is just one of many. Circle, there are so many other kind of internal communities. And so while you certainly, once you've let someone in, they have different access to you. But even within those platforms, you can have certain rooms that have another level of invitation only space. So if there's conversations you need to have at an even deeper level that need another level of security, you can customize in that way. And so I like that because it doesn't take away the communal experience that folks tend to go to TikTok, Facebook, Instagram for. But it gives you a bit more awareness of who's there and a bit more control of who shouldn't be there. Now, of course, we always have to be mindful of screenshots can go anywhere. Trusted community members can always default, but that happens even in shared physical space and not just shared digital space. So
And everything costs something. If you are not paying a subscription for a community application, then it's your data or your eyeballs.
that's right.
Like everything costs something. I think the other thing that you've seen a lot of people moving toward is Substack and Patreon, because there is some of them have like a paid tier or a membership. And so I don't know the guidelines for those in terms of like if what you can do for like free memberships and that kind of thing, but those are potentially a little more closed. I've seen people moving away from Substack toward Patreon just because I think the like leadership at Patreon.
Ironically, the product management interactive design experience is now starting to creep into Patreon, where a lot of like more well-known writers are getting pushed to the top and pushed to different products. And yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We have a task on our hands, Bethany. We have a 3-part question and we have 3 minutes.
Okay.
The 3-part question comes from the same person. So Adeniran has a 3-part question. The first part of his question is, how do you what metrics do you use to measure engagement success? So that question is housed within the engagement kind of focus. And then a secondary question, part 2, is how do you balance aesthetics versus functionality in design and engagement digitally? And the third part of their question is, how do you handle cultural differences, predominantly language differences, in digital communities? So engagement success metrics, aesthetics versus functionality with design and digitally, and language barriers.
So for engagement success, I think that depends on what kind of goals that you have, either for that your users have or that you have as a company. Engagement might be like X people visiting, or a lot of times engagement is like how long they're watching a video or something like that, or how many people respond to a message. But I think it depends on what are the goals for your community, and then how do you then define your engagement metrics in a way that you can measure. Um, Also, when I've worked on products, I've done a lot of usability testing. So for me, I really like to build some metrics around like how successfully can people complete tasks that they want to do in this application, and test that. And then as we tweak, we can figure out improvements over time based on, developing a benchmark or a baseline and then seeing where it goes over time. Um, I think those have to be locally defined in general, though, because otherwise, just like we want to have 1 million followers, or 5,000 users per month or something like that. How do you measure the baseline and then figure out any sort of improvement, and make sure you're acknowledging that whatever goals you have, whatever engagement metrics you have, you're going to start modifying your behavior to support that. Is that the goal that you have? Is that the thing that you really want to measure? Um, or is it depth of an engagement instead of numbers? Hopefully that addresses that one. Aesthetics versus functionality. Because I'm not as much a visual designer, I probably err a little bit more toward functionality, or what is like the workflow that we're trying to support, and then make sure that the aesthetics, there are a lot of design systems now. That's been a big trend over the last 5 to 8, 10 years of building a design system so that buttons they look consistent across the application. You don't look like you've kind of Mod Podge together like 5 different button styles, and text styles are all over the place, and colors mean different things in different places. So design systems, kind of like in the past, you'd have like a brand style book. In the technology world, we've got design systems, so buttons like look the same, and you'll even notice here like the icons look similar when you're in Zoom. So I think relying on common patterns and accepted visual design aesthetics. And then I err toward functionality, because if someone doesn't use it, it can be beautiful and it's not going to be helpful. It's not going to be useful.
Right, right. And the last
Uh,
part of that question is just, how do you handle language barriers within digital communities?
um, Couple extremes. One is like when I worked in ed tech and we were a global company, we actually had like localization effort and we had text strings that would be translated. So depending on where you were using the technology, it would use different language. Um, that's probably not realistic in a lot of what we're doing. I mean, I think evaluating your technology, if you need more of like a translation, evaluating the technology to make sure it can support those needs. But then also just thinking about like in general, how are your people in your community speaking? What's internal versus external language? And even like testing. I've done testing of different applications and I have people think aloud as as they're working through a task in the application. And that's when you find out like, oh, we had one that was like, uh, prof was truncated to pro. So people thought that this little pro icon or this little pro badge next to a name was like a professional user, not a professor. So like
Mm,
changing something to prof instead of truncating it 3 letters made a difference. So little things like that you may notice if you ask people to walk you through what they're seeing and experiencing when they're going through part of your digital experience. And you can find little ways that you could actually start to tailor the language to better resonate with with what's going to make sense to them.
I love this. Thank you for entertaining that rapid fire response.
Yes.
We have come to the culmination of our talk. And as you can see in the chat, folks both enjoyed it and want more time. So that's always a good sign. Adeniran, I also dropped in the chat a tool called Wordly, which is an AI tool that one of our tech teams used at TIDEL, one of our TIDEL teams used for tech translation of languages last cycle. And so you might want to check that out. It's a bit pricey, but it gets the job done. But Bethany, thank you so much for your time. And to everyone who joined us today, thank you for remaining a bit past 1 o'clock. This talk will be archived on our YouTube playlist. But if you want to copy the chat, I recommend it because I tried my best to get actionable notes in the chat for you all. So feel free to hit those 3 dots at the top of your chat box before you leave if you want to take some of this rich wisdom with you. And Bethany has dropped her email address in the chat for those of you who were just getting your question teed up. She's willing to be connected with. And then David has dropped our brand new TIDEL network where you can access myself, the rest of our team, and more importantly, our growing community of folks who are doing this work who just want to be connected to each other. And there is no cost to join. We're just trying to create a space for like-minded folks to grow together. All right. Happy holidays. Happy holidays to each of you. And thank you for joining us.